Comedy clubs seem to be back in business. I was at Providence Comedy Connection last night. I'll tell you about that experience. It seems like places are starting to open up. Obviously, but you're getting comedians getting attacked all over the place. So places are starting to open up, which is good. But first, I do want to follow up on kind of a theme the last few weeks that we've been talking about, and that would be this whole Bryan Callen situation. And I don't know. It's a weird one for me because it's the one time, ladies, you had me on your side. I was against this piece of shit Bryan Callen, and I said it sounded like a credible story, but this one's weird. It's kind of going away. Bryan Callen's defending himself. No one's coming out against him anymore, really. This Tigerman woman hasn't spoken since that I've seen. Bryan Callen's doing interviews defending himself with Steven Crowder. Very strange situation. And now you get the Fighter and the Kid podcast, as I predicted, is, I guess, done. But they are now replaced. So it's all very confusing. So the Fighter and the Kid podcast, formerly with Brendan Schaub and Bryan Callen, we told you last week that Bryan Callen was erased from the bio, and it's been Josh Wolf recently. They've kind of had rotating. I think Bert Kreischer filled in. They've had rotating co-hosts for a little while. And now what I did not realize is I thought the Fighter and the Kid was their kind of solo venture. I thought it was Bryan Callen and Brendan Schaub out on their own, started a podcast, and it got very successful. I guess I was wrong. I don't know what this Cast Media is, but apparently they are the podcast network that owns the Fighter and the Kid. So Bryan Callen announced that he was going to make his comeback to the podcast, and evidently Cast Media and the sponsors said, not so fast, my friend. They are not allowing him to come back. Speculation is that sponsors started to threaten to pull out if Callen came back. That seems strange to me, only in the sense of, would you rather have Brendan Schaub running the show and just some random guy that we don't know if he has chemistry with, whether it's Josh Wolf or rotating members? That seems like an odd move to take this crazy successful podcast. Like with Call Her Daddy, we talked a lot about how, in theory, you could get two other girls who are high energy and kind of edgy and willing to talk about anything and entertaining, and you could have them do that podcast. The Fighter and the Kid is not, you're not able to franchise it out like that and just have anyone else fill in, because the people like Bryan and Brendan. It's not necessarily the subject matter. It's they like those guys. And, I'm not a big Brendan Schaub fan. Callen seems all right. I don't know a lot about him. But for whatever reason, that has caught on. Like, their personalities have caught on more than they're not just talking, UFC. So I don't know if that's going to work, the Fighter and the Kid with new members. But the Fighter and the Rinks, WRINKS, I guess my only assumption as to what that means. I don't listen to the podcast, so maybe it's an inside joke or something. But the Kid, I'm guessing the Rinks is because Bryan Callen is old, like wrinkled. Maybe give me some comments. Let me know if I sound like a fucking idiot and it's an obvious reference that I'm missing, but I think that's what it is. Regardless, the Fighter and the Rinks is now the new Patreon. And last I checked, they had like over 5,000 subscribers. It's going pretty fast. It's one of the fastest growing Patreons I've seen. So they're doing pretty well. The fan base is definitely supporting the hell out of them. And again, I don't know if that's right or wrong. If Bryan Callen is guilty of everything he's being accused of, well, then fuck Bryan Callen. He should probably be in jail if he's a rapist. But he's pretty adamantly saying this never happened. And he also came out and said, in every statement he makes, whether it's Crowder or the Instagram videos he's made, he says, this is not a cancel culture issue. I think the Me Too movement is good, blah, blah, blah. Yet for whatever reason, Olivia Munn and Whitney Cummings decided to make it into, hey, this is not a cancel culture issue. Yeah, we know. Bryan Callen's been telling you that. But on Whitney Cummings' podcast, Olivia Munn was a guest, and they made a vague reference to, these newspapers wouldn't print stories if they weren't true. If you're from Boston or you listen to the Kirk Minahan show, you just know that's blatantly false. I think if you follow journalism or the media in general over the last 5 to 10 years, you know that's inherently false. But Whitney Cumming and Olivia Munn kind of make this blanket statement that, when it comes to sexual assault, these newspapers aren't going to report, journalists aren't going to put their name on the line unless the story is credible. Agree with that or disagree. That's what they're saying. Olivia Munn then got more direct with it and went to Twitter and mentioned Bryan Callen and said, "Hey, Bryan, this is not a cancel culture issue, you fuck." Again, Bryan Callen didn't say it was. Whitney Cummings is I don't know Olivia Munn. I assume she's just an actress, which I don't know why actresses feel the need to make statements. I guess there's pressure on you in this era and blah, blah, blah. Whitney Cummings, kind of the same thing. I feel a little worse for Whitney Cummings being in the situation that she's in. You saw her turn her back immediately on Chris D'Elia. Seems like she's done that with Bryan Callen as well. Whitney Cummings is in a tough spot because I think her fan base and people in the media and just anyone who follows Whitney Cummings in general looks to her and says, "Hey, you're a kind of a powerful female voice in comedy. You've got a big audience. You're recognizable. You can make a statement." And it kind of the same problem that happened with Amy Schumer, which we'll get to in a minute. But Whitney Cummings is friends with these guys and is now in a scenario that she has to play, judge and jury. She has to decide if Bryan Callen and Chris D'Elia are guilty. It's not really fair. If Whitney Cummings says, "Hey, these are my friends, and I will support them until I know the facts of the case," then she gets hammered by feminists and social media and everyone that wants to ruin you for not thinking the right things. If she says what she did and comes out against Chris D'Elia and Bryan Callen and turns her back, then she kind of comes off as disloyal. And then you have the D'Elia and Callen fans going after her for, not being a real friend, not going with the comedian's code, as Jeff Ross would say, apparently. So Whitney Cummings is in a tough spot, but I'm in the camp of she looks very disloyal. I think you should take a beat in these situations, especially when it's someone you know, where Whitney Cummings seemed to be friendly with Callen and D'Elia and a lot of these guys. So if it's someone you know and liked and respected, maybe you should take a step back and say, well, what are the facts of this case beforehand? And then if you think he's guilty, make your statements. But don't do this weird thing where you don't name him and you unfollow everyone on social media, but you're not actually taking a stand. That just seems weak in general. So it's tough for Whitney Cummings, but she should take a stand in some direction rather than this wishy-washy thing. But again, where it's not fair is I'm being critical of Olivia Munn for actually taking a stand because I think she's just wrong. I think it's wrong to say, well, why would the LA Times get a story wrong? Well, look at what the media has done for 10 years. There's a clear bias. There's a storyline that they want to be accurate, and they're trying to move merchandise. They're trying to sell newspapers. So if they say the facts aren't all here yet on the Bryan Callen story, that's not going to get as much buzz as Bryan Callen rapist. So they have incentive to make the story look a certain way as well. And again, reading Tigerman's story, I believed it. Now, hearing Bryan Callen, I'm a little more uncertain. It's tough. Callen's in a weird place too, because we always say, well, if you're guilty, wouldn't you defend yourself a little more? Like Chris D'Elia just went away. I'm sorry, if you're not guilty, I should say. Chris D'Elia just went away. And we say, well, if you're not guilty of these things, wouldn't you be screaming from the mountaintops, I didn't do this? That's what Bryan Callen's doing. And we're all saying, hey, buddy, why don't you take a break? So then Amy Schumer steps in, inserts herself, and throws a social media post to Bryan Callen. And my problem with Amy Schumer is much greater than Whitney Cummings. I used to be an Amy Schumer fan. And then, and I would defend her with the joke stealing stuff. I think a lot of that is parallel thinking or being younger in comedy and just going for topics that a lot of people have already discussed. I don't know that she's necessarily a thief the way maybe Carlos Mencia was a thief. But what she's done now with the political stuff and just changing who she is and turning her back on who she was, that's my issue with Amy Schumer now. And I don't know if it's totally her fault. She got so famous so quick that maybe that's just what happens. We talked about Seth Rogen last week. Maybe when you get to a certain point of fame, it's impossible to be funny. But Amy Schumer, it seems very petty. So Bryan Callen, a few years ago, I don't know if you're watching this show, you might have heard this story. It was somewhat minor, but this guy Brendan Sagalow, who's friends with my guys, Mike Feeney and Mike Cannon. Brendan Sagalow had his first headlining gig at Caroline's, I think, in New York City. And he was on stage, and Amy Schumer basically walked up and kicked him off stage of his first headlining gig because she's Amy Schumer and she wanted to work out her SNL material. So Bryan Callen was talking about that and essentially saying, hey, Amy Schumer deserves her place in comedy. All the movies she made, the fame that she has, the audience she has, she's earned that. You know, no matter what you think of her, she's earned that. But she's not some comic genius. She's not Richard Pryor or George Carlin. That's the gist of what Bryan Callen said on the formerly known as Fighter and the Kid podcast. That doesn't seem like a crazy insult to me. All the evidence would point to that's why Amy Schumer is taking these victory laps on social media over Bryan Callen being a sexual predator. And I would say to Amy Schumer, the reason that's wrong is because Amy doesn't know all the facts. But the reason it's wrong to take a victory lap is one of two reasons. Either A, you are kind of celebrating that a man is a sexual predator and that a woman was sexually assaulted. That's not a great look for Amy Schumer. Or B, you are vocally celebrating a man being falsely accused of sexual assault and his life being ruined. So not a great look for Amy Schumer. When you see where she came from and the group she came up with in comedy, it's kind of amazing what she became, but she looks like a total hypocrite in all this. So it's a strange story. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if Bryan Callen did these things, but it is interesting to see. All you have to do is make an accusation against someone, and then that changes their life. Whether you want to, maybe ruined is too harsh, but it completely changes their life. Bryan Callen was on this super successful podcast. Now, all of a sudden, he can't use that name anymore. They have to switch to a Patreon model, which I think takes a decent chunk of the change there. And their stuff is now behind a paywall. So, and not to mention, which probably should have been the first thing I listed, that people think of him as a rapist now. So you can just throw out an accusation, and no matter how credible it is, that sticks to you forever. I don't know if Tigerman is telling the truth, as well as these other women in the LA Times article, but that label is with Callen forever, no matter how true it is. And that's what I think the ladies like Olivia Munn and Whitney Cummings and Amy Schumer should look at in these cases. Side note with all that stuff, Crystalia was removed from this new Zack Schneider zombie movie that they're making for Netflix, replaced with Tig Notaro. Very weird. You hear a lot of not great things about Tig Notaro from certain sects of the comedy community. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But Crystalia out, Tig Notaro in. Interesting move. Interesting move for that to be the person that replaces Crystalia. I guess they're making a statement socially rather than maybe thinking about what's best for the movie. But we'll keep an eye on that as well. Next bit of news this week hits close to home. My guys, the Legion of Skanks podcast, are under attack. Look out. They are in the midst of a heated presidential election. And I guess when you step into the politics game, you're going to get these type of lunatics coming after you. So actually, KFC did a very good job recapping it. And the only reason I point that out is I'm curious if KFC listens to the Legion of Skanks podcast, because he summed it up in a way that was actually so perfect. It made me think he listens to every episode and knows exactly what's going on. He did a good job. Because when you hear this is a strange story, and usually the media gets it completely wrong because they're reporting on something who the characters in the story they know nothing about. But KFC did a good job with it. The only thing he had wrong, which a lot of people had wrong, was it seems like people thought Ari Shafir and maybe Dave Smith or other members of Legion of Skanks were there. It was just Big J Oakerson, Louis J. Gomez, and Zach Amico. I think people thought that Ari was there because he claimed to be there when he put up a video on Twitter. But so Big J Oakerson and Louis J. Gomez, 2/3 of the Legion of Skanks, were out at like an outdoors comedy festival that they're having in rural Pennsylvania, I believe. And they built the stage. So I guess this place was having a festival. They're doing like one day for every week they were closed. So like 17, 18 nights of comedy or something. And they built a stage outdoors. And I guess the stage is very high, probably too high for a comedy stage. And I mention that only because, Big J Oakerson gets his name for a reason. Big dude. And he typically sits on a stool, Cosby style, when he's doing comedy. And he does a lot of crowd work. Apparently, there was a family there that they're not too familiar with the Legion of Skanks style of comedy. Apparently, the dad was a Legion of Skanks fan, which is weird for a father, the patriarch of the household, to say, "Hey, fam, come on, we're going to see the Legion of Skanks." That's an odd instinct, but I do respect it. I like it. That seems like my kind of guy. But Legion of Skanks is a weird one to take someone who is not familiar with them. So that's your first mistake, sir. But apparently the family also got real banged up. The booze was a-flowing. And certainly I can sympathize if you're in that situation, although my style of drunk is more silly, annoying, and then fall asleep. Whereas some people get a little rowdy, which is apparently what this woman did. So Big J starts doing some crowd work, obviously rips into her a little bit, as you do. That's probably the best way to handle a drunk crowd member who's ruining the show. And he starts giving her some guff. And then as they're being kicked out, my understanding is as they're being kicked out of the show, I think security kind of took action. And then the crowd starts cheering that they're leaving. And then Big J takes one crack at, I believe, the girl. I think the joke was targeted at the girl, but her boyfriend took exception to it and walked up to the stage, or charged the stage, and took Big J and dragged him. I guess poor fucking Big J banged up his shoulder. Luckily, Louis J. Gomez, who's always sniffing out a fight. Louis would have found this fight if he was still in New York and the event was in Pennsylvania. He would have been lurking in the background somehow. He pounces on the guy. The fans get involved. Evidently, someone pepper sprayed the guy. Security and police said it was not them. So I guess a fan might have had pepper spray. I don't know what was going on. Some good Samaritan who said, "You're not ruining my fucking comedy show," stepped in. So it was a real fucking melee, it seemed like, as you saw in the video. Good for the Legion of Skanks guys to get some press out of this. I saw the tweet from Barstool tagged them. KFC did a real good synopsis, said everyone's name, although he said Louis Gomez instead of Louis J. Gomez. Big mistake. But good for the Legion of Skanks guys for getting some well-deserved press. It'll be interesting to see if Big J pursues charges. But I think the real interesting thing is that this is obviously the work of Shafir Gillis 2020. Ari Shafir worked his way into the election for Legion of Skanks president and is running away with it. It's actually been a pretty funny bit. Legion of Skanks is a podcast I listen to pretty much weekly, and there are times where it feels a little stale, and it's strange. Anytime they have like life injected into them, or they have a great bit going for a long period of time, it seems to be because Ari Shafir is the lifeblood of that podcast. Ari Shafir is the fuel that drives the Legion of Skanks ship. And credit to Ari for not even being on this podcast and just being such a good friend that he constantly lifts these guys up. It's really unbelievable. It's a testament to who Ari is as a man and a friend. So all you people that hate Ari Shafir for the Kobe thing, my producer Justin included, I'm sure, he is deep down, I think, a good guy. And my my podcast suggestion for the week would be, to that end, Ari Shafir, Skeptic Tank. He had Joe List on, and they talked about being Joe List was a loss prevention worker for Sears back in the day, and it was actually they talked about that. That was their one topic of the week, and it was actually pretty interesting and kind of funny. Joe List, a very funny guy. I reviewed his special last week. I thought it was great. I hope I sold it enough because it is definitely worth checking out. I hope he gets to 1 million views. And that leads me into my review of the week. But I will say, if you want to get into Legion of Skanks, I recommended this a couple weeks ago, but the last few weeks have been very good. There was 1 week that was a little flat. No coincidence, it was the week Ari wasn't there. But they've been very good lately, and it's a funny podcast in general. So check those guys out. But the reason I bring up Joe List and some of these lesser-known guys having comedy specials is because my comedy special review for the week is Rob Schneider's new Netflix special. And I don't know if you kids are aware of this, but it seems like there are some differences between men and women. Men are a little more into the sex, and I guess it seems kind of like women are more into relationships. That's what I learned from Rob Schneider's special. And races are different as well. Those were my big takeaways from Rob Schneider's special. I don't want to shit on Rob Schneider's special too much because I think Rob Schneider is kind of the Nickelback of comedy, where it's a go-to easy reference. South Park did a great job of completely mocking and ruining any credibility Rob Schneider would have ever had. He's a guy who's very successful and no one's quite sure why, much like Nickelback, but also like Nickelback, it's easy to overstate how bad they are. Like Rob Schneider, there's a lot worse comedians than Rob Schneider that are successful. He's just so bland and not unique that it doesn't make you, well, if it wasn't for Adam Sandler, no one would know his fucking name. It wasn't horrendous. It was, let me put it to you this way. If you are a Rob Schneider fan, if you're a fan of the movies that Rob Schneider has starred in and the work he's done in the past, you'll probably moderately enjoy this. It might be up your alley. If you don't care for the work of Rob Schneider, this will not win you over. There's nothing in it that is unique or insightful or interesting or particularly hilarious. I didn't think it was extremely mockable until the end. So it's only like a 45-minute special. And the last 5 or 10 minutes is Rob Schneider, if you don't know, if you're familiar with El King, who had one monster hit a few years ago, and then I don't think has done a lot since then. I'll hear a couple songs of hers, but I think you might put her in the category of one-hit wonder. Maybe it's too early to say that. But El King was super popular last year, and then a lot of people were surprised to find out it's Rob Schneider's daughter. So Rob Schneider, as I guess, for him, a very nice moment. I don't know why we needed to watch it, but he kind of congratulates his daughter, brings her on stage, and in a bizarre twist, they sing a song together. And it's not supposed to be funny. It's just them kind of singing a duet, which, you know, when you turn to Rob Schneider, you're always hoping, you say, I know I'm going to get some laughs, but I hope for a heartwarming moment as well. And sure enough, you got it. So it's a weird one. I will give it exactly a 5.0, a nice even 5. I'm taking the weird song at the end out of it. But it was, you know, kind of the opposite of what I said about Jerry Seinfeld, where I was like, there are points where if you're watching Jerry Seinfeld's new special, you're almost laughing because it's Jerry Seinfeld, where if it was Jerry Smith, you'd say, well, this is terrible. This is just hack. Because this is Rob Schneider, you might watch it with the lens of, oh, this is fucking horrendous. But if it was Rob Smith, you would say, this is fine. This is whatever. So a lot of people might unfairly criticize it because it's Rob Schneider. It was just bland. Like I said, if you're a Rob Schneider fan, you're not going to be disappointed. And if you're not, you're certainly not going to be wowed. So an even 5.0 for Rob Schneider. I hope I covered everything this week. I don't think there's anything I'm forgetting. If there is, leave it in the comments. Throw me a comment. You can tweet me at blindmike_, at dropthemicyt, and also give me some suggestions there. Someone DM'd me and suggested that I watch Lavelle Crawford's Netflix special. The guy who played Huel in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and I like to think more known for playing Landslide in Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I'm curious if he thinks that I'm going to rip it apart or that it was actually better than expected. But I'll give it a watch. Maybe some week I can do top requests. If you guys have any specials that you think would be funny for me to review or something, I'll get to those last week because I don't know how many more we've got. Netflix seems to be scraping they just released Rob Schneider, so they seem to be scraping the bottom of the barrel. I don't know how many they have left. That's what I wanted to mention. I did almost forget this. So what I wanted to say about the special is, shame on Netflix. You can't blame Rob Schneider. If Netflix throws you a bunch of money, I don't know how much he got paid, but I'm assuming it's a healthy amount. Netflix throws Rob Schneider a bunch of money. Of course he's going to take it to do a stand-up special. And I get Netflix's want to do diversity. Give female comedians a voice and minorities and transgender people and gay people and all. That's tremendous. Keep doing that. But when you give a white guy a special, it should be a funny one. Save your money. Save your money. You don't have to pay Rob Schneider. You don't have to pay even Jerry Seinfeld to these guys. Save your money. Give it to guys who are actually funny. Joe List, Mark Norman, Sam Morrill, Tim Dillon, Andrew Schultz, these guys that are actually genuinely funny. Throw them a bone, and you might see stand-up fans that aren't on Netflix flock to Netflix. I can only imagine that's the goal. Otherwise, I don't see the point of throwing Jerry Seinfeld all this money. I assume you want people to subscribe. So shame on Netflix for not, just going with the easiest guys to hire instead of doing the research in comedy a little bit. And then I would be remiss before we got out of here if I didn't mention that I went to see my guy, my buddy, my good pal, Shane the Young Bull Gillis, future vice president of the Legion of Skanks. Shane Gillis was at the Providence Comedy Connection last night, and his opener, actually, Chris O'Connor, another Philly comedian, was also very funny. And I would say if those guys are in your area, definitely go check them out. Shane's very funny. I know I talk about him a lot, but I think it's well-deserved. He's a funny, up-and-coming comedian. I think he's going to have a real good career. But the only reason I'm not going to tell you about every time I go to see a comedian, the reason I wanted to tell you about it is because it was an interesting experience. And I think the average person right now during coronavirus is probably not that worried. Going back to comedy clubs is probably low on your list. But I'd imagine if you're watching this show and you've made it this far into the episode, you're probably interested in going back to comedy clubs. And I'll tell you, I think for the comedians, it was a little weird. It seemed like they felt like the laughs weren't there or the energy wasn't there or something. That's the vibe I got from them, the way they were talking. But as far as being in the audience, I didn't really notice a difference. Seemed like the same type energy. And I got to tell you, it was fucking luxurious. So normally, if you've been to the Providence Comedy Connection, it's the same at Laugh Boston. And I imagine, I haven't been to a lot of comedy clubs around the country, but I imagine it's pretty similar where you jam-pack these people in as much as you can to get as many asses and as many seats as you possibly can. And you're elbow to elbow, your drinks and your food are all piled onto this one tiny table. You have no space. You can't move your seat at all. Now, with social distancing, it's one group to a table. You can only buy between 2 and 4 tickets. So we had a party of 3. The 3 of us get one table. We have the whole area. There's no one around us. It was a capacity of 100 people, I believe. And we were back indoors. They were outside in the Providence Comedy Connection for a few weeks. I think their tent got fucked up in the storm we had out here a couple weeks ago. But they're back indoors. And for me, it was a great experience. I don't know if it's ideal for the comics, especially when it comes to the amount of money they're making. I'm sure it's significantly less. But as far as the audience experience, it was honestly a little better just based on the amount of room you have. It's not as claustrophobic. You're not at all worried about getting coronavirus in that setting because I thought they did a really good job of social distancing and all that. So if you're in the area, Providence Comedy Connection is definitely, I feel like it's safe to go to, and it's worth the $20 or $25, whatever it is for a ticket. I thought it was pretty cool. A couple Minifans were out there. Some said hi. Some sheepishly took pictures of me instead. Both are cool. That's funny that they did that. But yeah, definitely go out to the Providence Comedy Connection, especially if my guy Shane Gillis is in town. And until then, like I said, blindmike _ drop the mic YT. If you want to give me any suggestions on comedy specials or anyone you want me to review. And until then, we'll talk to you next week.